Welcome to the third part of the Gentle Introduction to Flask series. In this video, I am going to show you how to work with web forms. You've probably noticed that in some of the applications that you use online, you're required to register and log in order to access your account. This is going to be an attempt to create and implement that feature in a Flask app. Before we can work with web forms, Flask expects certain configurations to be set. Our application at the moment has a very simple structure. I am going to create a new file or module that will handle all our configurations. I personally prefer to use the principle of separation of concerns when building an application. And what does that mean? It means that I have different aspects of my application handled separately and independently. This allows for code reusability throughout the application. So I am going to create a file called config.py. So attach config.py in the top level directory. And this module will handle all the configurations that our application will need. At the moment, our application is very simple and therefore we do not need a lot of configurations. I'm going to show you how you can work with the very first configuration that Flask expects when working with a web form. So import OS class config object, and then this first configuration is called secret key, and we will import it from environment variable. So os.environ.get secret key. So first we're beginning by sourcing it from the environment variable. If it exists, we're going to get it back. If it does not exist, then we'll create a safe fallback. So you will never guess. So now that we have this configuration set up, we need to register it in our Flask instance. So we'll go to init.py file and import this module. So from config, import config, and then pass it to the application instance, app.config.from object config. So let's test whether we can access this key from our terminal. Let's enter into a Flask shell interpreter. So using the command Flask shell and import app from app. So from app, import app.config secret key. So you have to be very careful with the spellings. And you can see we can access our application, and it's pretty interesting that we are getting the fallback value. Well, at the moment we have not set an environment key, and therefore it safely fallbacks to this other value. This is especially useful because it helps with handling Flask errors. You do not want your application to fail, but you want to provide fallbacks in case a certain value is missing. So with our configuration set, let us go ahead and start to create a web form. So let's exit the shell interpreter, and then within the app subdirectory, we are going to create another module called forms. So I'll move into the app subdirectory and create a file called forms.py. Again, following the principle of separations of concerns, we have specific modules that handle specific aspects of our application. So this forms module is going to define the forms that we want, and the very first form that I'm going to show you is the login form. But before we even create this login form, we need to install our first package. This package is responsible for handling creation of web forms. So we'll say pip3 install flask wtf. and we should have our package installed in our virtual environment instantly. So with that already installed, we can go ahead and start to create our form. So we'll say from Flask WTF import Flask form, from WT forms import string field, password field, boolean field, submit field, from WT forms dot validators import data required. And then we'll create our form. I will use a class to create a form, so this class is going to be called login form with capital letters, and then pass Flask form argument. And then obviously a login form will request for a username from a user, so we'll say username equals string field, and then pass the label to the field called username, and then ensure that a user has to put in their username by passing a validator. Validators equals data required. And then you also want to take their password, so we will say password field, provide a label, password, and ensure they fill it in. Validators equals data required. And then remember me equals boolean. It's a boolean field, so remember me. And then finally submit button, which is submit field, and then the label will be login. And that's pretty much it. That's how you can create a form. Now that we have our form setup, we need to pass this form to a Flask template. So we will do this by moving into the template subfolder and creating a file called login.html. So touch login.html, and we have the login template right here. So let's display our form. We'll begin by inheriting the base.html file, so using the extends keyword, extends base.html, and then block content, and block. Now we can start defining our template. The very first thing is I want to give it a title. So in the h1 tag, I'm going to call it, I'm going to say h1 login, and then now define my form. And then before I define my form, I'm going to create an action. I'm setting it to empty, then method to post. This is a form that posts data, so method post, and then no validate. Pretty much I do not want any validations to take place in my form so that I can actually see what's going on. Whenever we set action to an empty file, it means that the data passed in our form will be passed within the same URL that we are using to render our form. So I will begin by creating a hidden form dot hidden tag. This ensures that we protect our form against nasty attacks such as CSAF. So it's very important for you to ensure that you have that. And then a p tag, and then define the fields within our form. So the very first field, like we saw from the forms module, This is incorrect. It should be submit field. We are going to first begin by saying username form dot username dot label form dot username, and then we're going to set a value, a size for it. Let's say it says 32, and then we'll go and create the second field in our form, which is the password field. So same thing, form dot password dot label form dot password, and then we can also pass a size to it. Say size 32. The next field will be a remember me field, so same thing, form dot remember me, and then form dot remember me dot label. So this is a bit different from the first two in that we are first providing the field, then the label. All right, the last element of our form is the submit button. So same thing again, we are going to say form dot submit, and that's pretty much it. So now that we have a form and you're displaying it on a HTML template, we need to render this form. So we'll go to the routes module, and first thing we need to import that form from the forms module. We'll say from app.forms import login form, and then create a new route called app.route, and then the URL that will be used to access the form is login, and then define our view function, so login, and then pass the form first, so form equals login form, and then return render template login.html, give it a title, let's say login, and then ensure that you pass your form here. All right, now that we have the login route set, we can start our Flask server. So from the terminal, we're going to run Flask Run, and to access our local host, just click on that. Then when I pass it right here, there we have our Flask app running. So to access the login page, we need to pass the route login, and there you have it. We have our login form being displayed. Of course, since you have inherited some aspects of the base template, here we have it. Then now we have our title and of course our form. If you want to go back, we can just click on that and you're going back to home. Again, login, and we get our form. So what happens when you have a form? Of course, a user will put in the information and their password, and then click login. What happens when we click the login button? Let's see. We get method not allowed error. So how do we fix this? It's very simple. We need to go back to our route module and modify it slightly to accommodate the form to receive data. So now that we're able to render our form, we need to be able to validate information that comes through the login page. The very first thing that we need to do is pass a method. So we'll say methods equals first get and then post. So now when you try to pass some information within our login form, we will get something a bit more useful. Well, no error this time, at least that is fixed, and we're able to do that by simply passing the methods. So how do we handle the information that has been passed through a login form? We are going to modify the login view function to accommodate this. So we're going to say if form dot validate on submit flash you have requested to log in this particular user and you want them to be remembered. Remember me equals, and then we'll say dot format form dot username dot data and form dot remember me dot data, and then once that is done we want to redirect them to the home page. So we'll say return redirect to the login to the home route. So we'll say home is this function that we used this. Alright, so we need to import Flash and the redirect from Flask. So from Flask render template, redirect and Flash. So what exactly is Flash? Flash is a useful feedback message that a user can get when they're working with an application. We need to define the use of Flash in our base.html file. So when you navigate to base.html file, we want to display the Flash message. So how do we display a Flash message in a HTML file? So Flask works with Flash messages in this manner. So we will say we'll first create a block called if block message, if first, not if but rather with messages equals get flashed messages. Show you how that, and then you end the with block and with, and then move into the with, and then create a new block or a new condition if messages, and then we end the if and if, and then we can say we can loop through the messages that we have. So we say for message in messages, then we end the for block and for, and then we say message. Alright, so we have a method that handles Flash messages for us within the base.html file. One more thing that I would like to show you before we test this Flash message feature. Let us create a dynamic way of displaying the title of our application. So the same way that we have handled the Flash message, we're also going to do the same for the title. So we're going to say if title, and then let's end the title, and if and then we'll say title, if a title exists, then we're going to have that. If there is no title, then you're going to provide a fallback, using the else statement. So we'll say title Flask demo, and then we can get rid of this. So right now, if we try to reload our page, if we try to go back to home, reload it again, we navigate to login, put in an information, you can see that the application works extremely well. Now, instead of just remaining in the login page, we are redirected to the home page, which is pretty interesting. But our flash message is not working just yet. So we need to try and fix this. Probably we should not put this within the template, within the app content, the blog content, and rather put it right outside. Alright, so right now when you try to go back to login, alright, let's try and reload it one more time, put in our user's information, and you can see that it's redirected us to the home page, and we have a pretty much useful data right here. This is especially important for user feedback. It pretty much makes it a better user experience. All right, so every time in our application we have to sort of type in our route. Let's provide a link to the home page. So we're going to do the same thing here. Rather than every time typing in home page or login, we're going to create a link right here. And then we will say login. And then login. So back to our application, when you run it, we have these two links. So if you want to log in, just simply click on it and we get the login page or home. So far, so good. One thing that we need to do to improve the user experience in our application is, let's look at this. Whenever I type in my name and I forget to put in my password, I have no information what is going on. I don't get any feedback about what I've missed or what I've failed to do. So let's try and improve this form validation. So we'll navigate back to our application, and within the login template, we are going to improve our form validation. So we will say, let's say for the username field, we will say for error in form dot username dot errors, and then let's end our for loop. And 4, and then we can create a span element and say something like style equals color red, and then pass in some information like the error message. And we'll do the same also for the password field. and you can put a break right here to ensure that it looks a bit neat. And then we'll do the same for the password field. For errors in form dot password dot errors, and for span style color red, error. If we navigate to our template and reload our page, this time around, when you try to log in without passing on information, we are able to see this validation appear at the bottom of each field. So I haven't passed any username, so this field is required. So when I try to pass in my username and fail to pass in that and check my remember me, I still get an issue. There's a bug with my application here where the password field does not show up. So we need to go back to the form and see. I said for errors in errors, rather it should be for error in errors. So this time around, when I try to reload my page and click login, you can see both fields now have useful feedback. One last thing that I would like to point out is Flask provides the URL for to be used when rendering links. So we need to use URL for whenever we want to render links. For instance, instead of returning the actual route, we can use Flask's URL for to render this link. So we will change parts of our application to accommodate the use of URL for. So I'll say URL for, and then instead of passing the actual route, I'm going to pass the view function home. So URL for home. And then we'll also do the same for the login template. Instead of actually passing the links, the actual route links, we will use the URL for to do that. So we'll say URL for this is home, and then the same for the login link. We'll say URL for the login view function. So it works similarly, only that it's a bit more useful that way. So when I reload my page one more time, I click on this, you see it still works the same way as a normal link.